The distant planet had once been a world of beauty and life. Its skies had been a clear blue, its oceans a deep, sparkling turquoise, and its forests had stretched farther than anyone could see. People lived in harmony with their surroundings, building cities that blended with nature, and cultivating land that produced more than enough for everyone. But that was a long time ago. Over centuries, war, greed, and disease had slowly eaten away at the planet. Cities now lay in ruins, forests had burned, and the rivers had turned dark and poisoned. The people were weak and fearful, struggling to survive from one day to the next. Every corner of the world seemed to be a reminder of what they had lost. Their leaders had tried many ways to fix things, but every plan failed and hope was becoming a fragile thing. In their desperation, the rulers of the planet realized that they could not save themselves alone. They needed help that could not come from their own people. They looked to the stars, hoping that somewhere out there someone might hear their cries. So they built enormous machines that could send messages across space, into the dark stretches between galaxies. They encoded their plea with all the care and hope they had left. The message was simple but powerful. They needed saviors, beings strong enough to heal their dying world and restore life where there was decay. They did not ask for wealth or power, only for assistance, for beings who could bring hope and protection. The message traveled through space for years, passing stars and planets, asteroids and comets, moving faster than anything the people of the planet could imagine. And finally, it reached Earth. On Earth, people received the signal with curiosity, wonder, and some disbelief. Scientists studied it, trying to decode every symbol and meaning. Philosophers and thinkers debated what it could mean for humanity. Governments argued over whether to respond. Some wanted to offer help, seeing it as a chance to build alliances with beings in another part of the universe. Others were fearful, imagining what might happen if they sent people and they never returned, or worse, if they brought danger back with them. Meanwhile, ordinary people across the globe watched the skies, wondering if this was truly the moment. Humanity would reach out into the stars. Some were filled with hope, imagining that heroes would be chosen to travel and save another world, carrying the best of Earth's knowledge, compassion, and courage. Others feared the unknown, picturing terrible creatures arriving in response or some disaster beyond imagination. Every mind held a different vision, but the debates in governments and labs went on endlessly, with no final decision in sight. While humans argued, the world itself was not quiet. Beneath cities, in forests, in deserts, and in hidden laboratories, there were things that humanity had always kept locked away. Some were the result of secret experiments, the kind that should never have been attempted. Others were humans who had done terrible things, imprisoned for crimes no one dared to forgive. Some were animals that had been altered by science, their bodies and minds changed into forms that were dangerous and unpredictable. These were the monsters of Earth, hidden away so that most people would never know they existed. They were kept in cages, cells, and secret laboratories, and for years the world had managed to pretend they were not there. But when the message from the dying planet arrived, it stirred something in these hidden corners. The world had asked for heroes, for saviors, for beings capable of incredible feats. And in a way, these monsters were capable of exactly that. Where normal humans might hesitate or fail, these beings could act without fear, without mercy, and with power that seemed unnatural. They were the wrong choice for the job in the eyes of most people, yet the only ones strong enough to answer such a desperate call. Governments debated for months, but eventually, a secret decision was made. They could not risk sending the finest, the bravest, the most virtuous people of Earth. If the mission failed, it would be a great loss to humanity. Instead, they turned to those they had hidden away, the ones they had locked up, feared, and forgotten. They opened cages and doors that were meant to remain closed forever. They released criminals who had been deemed too dangerous to live freely. They freed experimental beings, some of whom were barely alive, others who were violent and unpredictable. Scientists and military leaders spoke in hushed tones, explaining the situation as if it were a necessary risk. They told themselves that these beings were the only ones who could survive the journey and face the unknown challenges of another world. When the monsters learned of the mission, some hesitated. They had been locked away for years, isolated from the world, and they had lived with pain, fear, and anger. Yet the promise of freedom was irresistible. In exchange for leaving Earth forever and traveling to a strange world, they could be free of cages, of rules, of judgment. Some felt a sense of excitement, imagining the power they would have on a planet with no one to stop them. Others felt fear, knowing that the unknown world might be even more dangerous than Earth. And some, deep in their hearts, felt a strange sense of duty, as if this was their chance to prove something to themselves, to show that they could be more than the monsters the world had labeled them. The ships that would carry them to the distant planet were enormous, built for both speed and survival. They were designed to withstand long journeys across the void, to protect the passengers from the cold emptiness of space, and to reach a world that might not be ready for them. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to make sure the vessels were ready. The monsters were trained, given equipment, and informed about the dying planet. They were told that the people there were fragile, desperate, and in need of help. They were warned that their actions could either save the planet or destroy it further. But many paid little attention to warnings. They were too focused on the chance to leave Earth behind. Finally, the day came when the ships were ready. The monsters were guided aboard, and the engines hummed to life. Earth watched in silence. The world had sent its answer to the call, but it was not the heroes anyone had imagined. It was not the scientists, the explorers, or the diplomats. It was not the best of humanity. It was something else entirely, creatures of power, of fear, of chaos. Yet as the ships left Earth's atmosphere, carrying their strange passengers toward the distant dying world, there was a sense of anticipation, a hope that perhaps, somehow, even monsters could bring salvation. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with challenges no one could fully imagine. The monsters carried within them the power to heal, to destroy, and to transform. And as they traveled through the silent expanse of space, leaving Earth behind, the dying planet waited. It did not know that its saviors were not saints, not angels, but beings who were feared and hated on their own world. The stage was set for a story that would test the limits of courage, power, and morality. A story where hope and fear would walk side by side, and where the line between savior and monster would blur forever. When the decision was made to send Earth's monsters to the dying planet, the world breathed a mix of relief and tension. Relief, because the threat of losing their own people was avoided, and tension, because the world knew it had released forces it could never control again. The prisons, secret laboratories, and hidden facilities that had held these beings for years were now empty. But the consequences of letting them go were only beginning to unfold. The monsters, in their own ways, understood that the journey ahead was both a chance and a test. Some saw freedom as the ultimate reward, while others were drawn to the opportunity to wield power on a new world where no one could stop them. The selection of monsters was deliberate, though not what most people would call careful. Those who had been strongest, most dangerous, or most cunning were chosen. A man whose body had been altered with advanced technology, making him stronger, faster, and almost unstoppable, was among the first. He had once been feared on Earth for his unmatched skill in combat and his refusal to obey any authority. Now he would be sent as a savior to a world that knew nothing of him. Alongside him was a woman who had been experimented on with chemical and biological enhancements. Her body could withstand extreme heat and her blood seemed to burn like fire. She had been locked away because her abilities were unpredictable, and yet those same abilities could heal and destroy in equal measure. Not all the monsters were human. Some were creations of science, beings born in laboratories and shaped by minds that had gone too far. They were hybrids of different species with intelligence and instincts that could make them terrifying in the wrong situation. There was a creature that could move in silence, see in complete darkness, and sense emotions as easily as a human reads a letter. Its purpose on Earth had been a secret experiment, But now it would find itself on a mission that might determine the fate of another planet. These beings did not understand morality the way humans did. Their decisions would be guided by instinct, curiosity, or their own sense of rules. The process of preparing them for the journey was complicated. Scientists had to teach them basic knowledge about the planet they were going to. They learned that it was weak, fragile, and filled with people who had suffered greatly. They were given maps, images, and descriptions of cities and forests, but they could not truly imagine what awaited them. The monsters were trained to navigate the spacecraft, to use the equipment, and to defend themselves if necessary. For some, the training was simple, almost unnecessary. They were already strong enough to survive anything. For others, who had never encountered a world beyond their own cages or labs, it was an entirely new experience. The monsters' personalities were as different as their abilities. Some were silent and calculating, thinking through every possibility before making a move. Others were loud and impulsive, letting their instincts guide them even when caution would have been wiser. Some were angry, full of resentment at a world that had trapped them for years. Some were curious, fascinated by the technology and knowledge that humans had developed. And some were neither angry nor curious, only waiting for the moment when they could step into a world where they would finally be free to act without restriction. The journey itself was filled with tension. Even though they were traveling together, there was no real trust between the monsters. Each one was aware of the other's abilities and weaknesses. They watched each other carefully, ready to react if someone made a sudden move. Conflicts began almost immediately. The man with enhanced strength challenged the fire-blooded woman over leadership, believing his body's power gave him the right to command. The hybrid creature stayed in the shadows, observing, knowing that patience could be more powerful than strength. Arguments, threats, and displays of power were common, and yet, strangely, these conflicts prepared them for what was to come. They had to learn to coexist, at least temporarily, because the challenges awaiting the dying planet would be greater than anything they had faced on Earth. As the days passed, the monsters began to talk about the world they were leaving behind. Some remembered the fear and hatred they had faced, the doors that had been locked on them, and the world that had wanted nothing to do with them. Others thought of Earth with anger, believing that the humans had never understood or appreciated their abilities. But despite their feelings toward their home planet, all shared a sense of anticipation. They were going to a world where their actions could matter, where their powers could be used for something greater, or something terrifying. The journey gave them time to reflect, to plan, and to imagine how they might shape the lives of those who awaited them. When the ships finally approached the distant planet, the monsters could see its surface from above. The land was scarred, oceans murky, and the skies filled with dark clouds. Cities lay in ruins, and smoke rose from forests that had once been full of life. The monsters felt a strange mixture of awe and satisfaction. For the first time, they were stepping into a world that needed them. Yet that world had nothing to protect itself. They were aware that they could impose their will, and that their power could transform everything they touched. Some felt a sense of responsibility, strange as it was, because they knew their abilities could heal or harm. Others felt excitement, imagining the chaos they could create and the control they could wield. The people of the dying planet were waiting. From the moment the ships appeared in the sky, crowds gathered, hoping, praying, and even trembling. They had called for saviors, and now beings from another world were arriving. They did not know these were monsters. They saw only power, strength, and hope. Their eyes shone with relief, not knowing that the beings who had answered their call were unlike anything they had ever imagined. As the ships landed, the monsters stepped out. They moved with a combination of grace, strength, and unpredictability. Some glanced at the crowd with curiosity, others with disinterest, and some with barely concealed hunger for the challenge of a new world. The people, weak and desperate, watched in silence. They had hoped for saviors, but the truth was far stranger and more dangerous than anything they could have imagined. And yet the presence of these monsters brought a strange feeling of hope. The dying planet had called and Earth had answered, not with heroes, but with beings who could change everything. For better or worse, the stage was now set. The monsters were here, and the people of the planet would have to learn to live with them, to understand them, and to hope that their strange saviors could heal the world without destroying it in the process. The journey of fear, hope, chaos, and power was only beginning, and neither the monsters nor the people knew how far it would take them. When the monsters stepped onto the surface of the distant dying world, the first thing they noticed was the silence. Unlike Earth, this world was quiet, almost painfully still. The wind carried the smell of burnt forests and stagnant water. Cities that had once been full of life were now crumbled shadows of their former selves. The people who survived moved slowly, their faces pale and worn, eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and hope. They had waited for saviors to arrive, and now, in front of them, stood beings unlike anything they had imagined. At first, the people could hardly believe what they were seeing. The man with enhanced strength looked like a walking tower of power, his muscles moving under synthetic skin, every movement precise and deliberate. He did not smile or speak. His presence alone commanded attention. The woman with fire in her veins exuded heat, and even from a distance, her skin seemed to shimmer, tiny sparks dancing along her arms. The hybrid creature, neither fully human nor fully animal, moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic, its eyes reflecting intelligence and an instinctive awareness of everything around it. The people had called for saviors, and yet they had received something far more complicated, something that filled them with both awe and fear. The monsters did not greet the people with words of comfort or gestures of reassurance. They observed the world, scanning the streets, the forests, the rivers, and the remnants of cities. Each step they took seemed deliberate, as if they were measuring the strength and weaknesses of this planet. Their eyes noticed the pollution in the water, the fires that still burned in distant forests, and the diseases that had taken root in both plants and animals. Some of the monsters were curious, touching and examining objects, animals, and even humans to understand the limits of this world. Others were quiet, holding back their instincts to destroy, knowing that they were here to heal, or at least, to change. The first interactions were cautious. The people approached slowly, offering words of thanks, small gifts, and gestures of peace. They were desperate to make the monsters feel welcome, hoping that kindness might guide them to be gentle. Some of the monsters accepted these gestures, nodding or allowing small acts of contact, while others ignored the people entirely, focused on the work that lay ahead. It quickly became clear that the monsters did not think in the same way humans did. They were not moved by emotion or tradition. Their actions were guided by instinct, by survival, and by the strange logic of beings who had lived their lives apart from society. Despite their frightening appearance and unpredictable behavior, something remarkable began to happen. The woman with fire in her veins touched the waters of a poisoned river. The liquid hissed and smoked as her body radiated heat, breaking down toxins and killing harmful bacteria. The river, once dark and lifeless, began to flow clearer, shimmering under the alien sunlight. Children who had watched from a distance ran closer, amazed at the transformation, but also scared of the being who had caused it. The man with enhanced strength began reinforcing the crumbling walls of a village, moving huge stones with ease, building structures that could withstand storms and floods. Yet his methods were harsh, crushing trees and uprooting old foundations to make way for stronger buildings. Every miracle he performed was paired with destruction, and the people learned quickly that salvation came with a price. The hybrid creature was even stranger. It hunted invasive pests that had overrun farmlands, eliminating threats with precision and speed. Farmers watched in awe as the creature cleared fields that had been barren for years, but they also felt a shiver of fear. The hybrid moved too quickly, too efficiently, sometimes taking livestock or small animals along with the pests. The people realized that the monsters operated under rules that were not human, that their version of healing and protection could include acts that were cruel by human standards. Yet even with this fear, hope grew. Crops began to flourish, rivers ran clearer, and smoke from fires decreased. It became clear that life could return to the planet, even if the price of that life was far higher than anyone had imagined. Dade's days turned into weeks. The people began to observe patterns in the monster's behavior. The fire-blooded woman would spend hours purifying water and air, but then wander into forests, burning overgrowth in a way that could seem reckless. The enhanced man would build walls and shelters with incredible skill, but he would also tear down structures that were weak or inefficient, regardless of human attachment. The hybrid creature moved silently through cities and farmlands, eliminating threats yet leaving a sense of unease behind, as if every action carried both salvation and judgment. The people started to whisper among themselves, unsure whether to call these beings saviors, monsters, or something in between. In the midst of this chaos, the leaders of the dying planet tried to communicate with the monsters. They offered guidance, explanations of human needs, and suggestions for action. At first, the monsters listened, but they quickly learned that human rules did not apply to them. They acted according to their abilities, instincts, and understanding of the world. Sometimes their decisions seemed cruel, other times miraculous. Sometimes they healed what humans feared was beyond repair. Other times they destroyed things humans hoped to preserve. The leaders realized that they could not control these beings, only observe and adapt to their presence. Even as fear grew, gratitude could not be denied. Villagers whose homes had been destroyed by disease or storm now had shelters built stronger than they had imagined. Farmers whose crops had failed for years found fields producing more than enough to feed entire villages. Children who had been weak and sickly were now playing and laughing, their health returning in ways no medicine on the planet could explain. The people learned a difficult truth. These monsters were not gentle, and yet they were saving their world in ways that humans could not. Hope and fear existed together, inseparable, as the planet slowly began to recover. The monsters themselves began to adapt to the world as well. The enhanced man learned to recognize which areas needed careful rebuilding and which could be destroyed without consequence. The fire-blooded woman began to measure her power, finding ways to heal without causing unnecessary damage. The hybrid creature learned to distinguish between threats and innocence, though instinct still guided many of its actions. Each of them was changing, just as the planet was changing, in a dance of power, instinct, and transformation that no human could have orchestrated. By the end of the first year, the planet was unrecognizable from the one the monsters had first arrived on. Cities still bore scars, but they stood stronger. Forests had begun to regrow, rivers had cleared, and the air felt fresher. The people had begun to understand the paradox of their saviors. They were terrifying, powerful, unpredictable, yet undeniably effective. They realized that the monsters from Earth were shaping their world, and that survival required both fear and gratitude. The line between life and death, hope and terror, was blurred, and everyone understood that the future of the planet depended on these strange, powerful beings whose intentions were never simple, but whose results were undeniable. The monsters had arrived as outsiders, feared and misunderstood. Yet in their presence, the dying planet had found a chance to live again. And so, the people began a cautious journey of acceptance, learning to live alongside beings who could heal and destroy, who could inspire awe and terror in the same breath. The stage was set for the next chapter of this world's story, where the paradox of salvation and danger would continue to unfold, as hope and fear walked together under alien skies. The people of the planet soon realized that the monsters were unlike anything they had ever imagined. They were terrifying, yes, but their power brought results that no human could achieve. Villages that had been abandoned for decades were now protected by walls stronger than any they had known. Crops that had failed year after year were growing in abundance, fed by rivers and soils purified by the fire-blooded woman. Disease that had once swept through towns was retreating, as though the monster's presence alone drove it away. Yet for every miracle there was an act of destruction. Forests were burned to make room for farmland. Old homes were crushed to build stronger ones, and small animals were consumed by the hybrid creature in its hunt for pests. The people felt a strange mixture of gratitude and fear, unable to separate. Their relief from their terror. Some villagers began to worship the monsters. Shrines were built and offerings of food, water, and flowers were left at their feet. People whispered prayers, not always asking for salvation, but for protection, for mercy, and for guidance. In markets and homes, tales spread of the monsters, power, stories that grew with each telling. Children were told to respect them, to fear them, and in the same breath, to trust them. Leaders of the planet tried to regulate this worship, reminding people that the monsters were not gods but beings from another world. Yet the more they spoke, the less influence they seemed to have. The monsters acted according to their own rules, indifferent to human politics or tradition. Slowly, a new kind of faith grew, one built on both fear and hope. The monsters themselves were aware of the people's reactions, though they did not fully understand them. The man with enhanced strength occasionally allowed the villagers to follow him, showing them how to rebuild walls or defend their towns. He did not teach out of kindness, but because he saw efficiency in training them. The fire-blooded woman sometimes paused her purification work to watch humans adapt to her presence, noticing their fear and awe, though she never truly felt concern for them in human terms. The hybrid creature moved silently, observing patterns, learning how humans lived and how they survived, occasionally interacting but always on its own terms. They did not seek worship, but the attention fascinated them, a strange reflection of the control and influence they wielded. Conflicts inevitably arose. Some monsters began to clash over priorities. The enhanced man believed that the most important task was to build strong fortifications, while the fire-blooded woman insisted that purifying water and air should come first. The hybrid creature often disrupted their plans, hunting pests or enemies before they could be dealt with in other ways. Villagers tried to mediate, but they quickly learned that negotiation held little power over beings whose strength and instincts surpassed their own. And yet the results of these conflicts often produced unexpected benefits. Walls were built quickly, rivers were cleansed, and fields were protected more efficiently than any single plan could have achieved. Chaos and order intertwined in ways that humans struggled to comprehend. Over time, the people grew to understand the paradox of their saviors. Fear and admiration became inseparable. Children who once hid from monsters now learned to walk near them, holding small animals or carrying supplies. Farmers whose lands had been destroyed and rebuilt countless times now followed the guidance of the monsters, learning which crops would thrive and which areas to avoid. Villagers still whispered when the monsters passed, sometimes kneeling in fear, sometimes in gratitude, but always watching carefully. They began to realize that survival required not only hope, but respect for the beings whose power they could not challenge. Even the leaders began to change. They had arrived expecting to control, to direct, and to guide, but they discovered quickly that influence was an illusion. Instead, they learned to adapt, to understand the logic of these alien beings, and to negotiate when necessary. Diplomacy took a new form, one built not on equality or shared culture but on observation, timing, and careful strategy. Leaders had to anticipate the monster's actions, predicting what they might do next based on instinct and power rather than human reason. It was a humbling experience, but it taught them a lesson about survival and cooperation in a world far different from their own expectations. As months passed, the monster's impact deepened. Disease became rare, rivers flowed with clarity, forests began to regrow, and towns prospered. Yet the people never forgot that these miracles came at a price. Every act of creation was paired with destruction, every healing with fear. They realized that the monsters were not bound by morality or tradition. Their actions were a reflection of power, instinct, and the strange sense of purpose they carried with them from Earth. Humans could only adapt, learning to live alongside beings who could heal and destroy in equal measure. Strangely, the monsters themselves began to change. Living among people, even beings from another world influenced them. The enhanced man learned patience, understanding that destruction without purpose was wasted effort. The fire-blooded woman discovered that careful control of her powers could produce better results than unchecked force. The hybrid creature, observing humans, began to act with more precision, targeting threats without harming innocents as often. They were still monsters, still unpredictable and powerful, but they were learning to interact with a fragile world that demanded both fear and respect. By the end of the second year, the planet had transformed in ways no human effort could have achieved alone. Villages thrived, cities began to rebuild, and forests were slowly reclaiming ruined land. The people's faith in their alien saviors was complicated, a mix of awe, fear, and gratitude. They had come to accept that survival was not gentle, that hope and terror walked hand in hand, and that their strange protectors were neither fully friend nor fully enemy. This balance, fragile and intense, became the rhythm of life. Humans and monsters coexisted, bound by necessity, and slowly learning that their fates were intertwined. The presence of the monsters changed everything, not just the land but the people themselves. They grew stronger, braver, and more resourceful, learning to anticipate and respond to powers far beyond their understanding. Stories of miracles and destruction were shared around fires, in homes, and across fields. Songs were sung of fear and hope, of the strange beings who healed and destroyed, who punished and protected, who inspired awe and terror in equal measure. In the hearts of the people, the paradox became clear. They had been saved, but by beings they could neither control nor fully understand. The world had changed forever, and life on this planet would never be the same again. Years passed, and the monster's influence became part of the planet's history. The man with enhanced strength continued to build and protect, moving through villages like a shadow of power. The fire-blooded woman purified and healed, her flames creating life even as they destroyed. The hybrid creature roamed silently, ensuring balance between pests, disease, and danger. The people learned to live with this constant duality. Their survival dependent on understanding that miracles came with fear, and power could not be separated from instinct. The monsters never demanded worship, yet the people gave it freely. Shrines were built, offerings made, and festivals celebrated in their honor, though always mixed with a quiet fear of their unpredictable nature. Children grew up learning respect for beings far more powerful than themselves, and adults found humility in the face of such strength. The world had been transformed by the arrival of creatures that were not heroes in any human sense, but saviors in a way no human could have been. And yet, the monster's story was far from over. They remained on this world, shaping its future in ways humans could not predict. Their presence was a reminder that salvation often comes in forms that are strange, powerful, and even frightening. The people understood that they had received help from Earth, but not from the Earth they had imagined. They had called for saviors, and Earth had answered, not with angels, not with saints, but with beings that could heal, destroy, and inspire, all at once. In this strange, terrifying, and miraculous coexistence, life endured, hope survived, and fear became a guide for survival as much as it became a lesson in respect.